I was fortunate enough to help out a bit with a recent music video for my close friends, the Paperweights, which is out now on YouTube. I'll put a link in the description. I think it's a really incredible step up in terms of cinematography, and I also think the song is an interesting new direction for them, so I would highly recommend it.
We haven't seen old Hitler for a jolly long while. He went to France just to see what we was doing. He says the hell's horse be my bloody ruin. For we haven't seen old Hitler for a hell of a while. Maybe he's grown up with a mind. Let's go. He's the leader of a German sausage band. Old Hitler is a filthy old. You thought I was going to say something else, didn't you?
I did.
That clip was from the website of Ian Rawes, who was an archivist, who I think sadly died a few years ago. His website's still kind of hanging on, although I think as the ownership of the domain lapses, it seems to be kind of collapsing a little bit, unfortunately. But he did an incredible job during his life of preserving a number of what are called actuality recordings, and these are recordings taken, I think, for radio between about 1930 and 1960 that capture the natural, ordinary texture of street life, especially in London. So things like markets, people singing songs, buskers like you just heard, pub sing-songs, street parties, and in many cases interviews with ordinary people. These recordings are something that I'd hoped existed but didn't know about until recently. From the 1960s onwards, there's kind of an explosion of recordings of natural, unrehearsed British English speech, but before then it gets a lot rarer to find these things, and these actuality recordings include lots of examples where people are speaking, probably not even realising they're being recorded, or at least not caring. And these are of course a good reference for accents of the time, normal people's accents. From the clip of the busker that you just heard, we get a sense of a working class accent, not hugely surprising in the way it sounds. One interesting feature is the use of the h sound in the word Air Force, so he says Hair Force, and this is something that is pretty well recorded in working class London speech from the 1800s into the 1900s. Not only did working class Londoners delete the H phoneme from certain words, but they also sporadically added it to words that started with a vowel. He also exhibits an accent feature called L vocalization, which is where the L phoneme, if it occurs at the end of a syllable, becomes basically a vowel. So in words like else, old. And I have this L vocalization in my own accent. That's become a lot more normal in middle class accents as well, more recently. He also has other normal working class features of the time. He has a very tense dress vowel, for example. His vowel in words like dress, set is more like eh, whereas in my accent it's more like eh. It's low mid in my accent rather than high mid like in his. So you get nice natural recordings of all these accent features, and you also get some sense of the variety of working class London accents at the time. So take this clip from Billingsgate Fish Market in 1935. It's obviously a little bit kind of rehearsed or put on for the recording device, but you still get very good accent features from it.
Can't you take less, Dan?
Sorry, old boy, I've been getting that all the morning, and with this gale blowing, there's no saying what supplies will be like tomorrow.
Well, I thought you'd help me a little bit. I've been trading here on and off for your old man and yourself for the last 30 years. Can't you take a tenner off of each?
Absolutely impossible, Sam boy. I don't like to refuse to serve you, but I must give the man at the port a fair deal.
You're Shawman on your head. On my head, I've just come all the way from Tarriel.
I don't care if you come from New York. The man just bought 20 kippers and he wants some.
All right, all right.
A feature you hear in older Cockney accents today is a weird kind of partial glottal replacement around fortis plosive consonants. Let's zoom into this section of speech.
I don't care if you come from New York. The man just bought...
So we're between the words yolk and So here you have a vowel, which the speaker pronounces as a slight diphthong, o, a plosive consonant, k, and then another vowel, In this sequence, this speaker cuts off the first vowel with a glottal stop, abruptly closing his vocal folds. He moves his tongue back to the soft palate as if he was making a k sound, but then he releases the glottal stop and the k sound at about the same time, immediately starting voicing as he goes into the next vowel. So it sounds like yoga. This is in contrast to a modern SSB accent like mine, where I just say Yorker, Yorker. So there's no glottal closure at any point. I just go from the first vowel into the k, then a few milliseconds of voiceless air coming out that we call aspiration, and then the next vowel. Yorker, Yorker, as opposed to yoga, yoga. As I say, this feature hasn't disappeared at all. Even speakers who aren't that old still do it. And incidentally, despite the hundreds of miles between the two cities, people in Newcastle do this as well. Some of the features here do sound old-fashioned, like the way this man smooths the vowel in years, years.
The last 30 years, the last 30 years.
The phrasing and intonation also strike my ear as very old-fashioned, but in this case, as they're obviously kind of performing a scene, it's hard to know how much of that is what they'd naturally do if they were really having this conversation. Possibly all of it, possibly not very much. In plenty of the other recordings, you can hear what sound like just people in the background having real interactions, albeit also sometimes kind of performative because they're trying to sell something.
Now bargain here, look, 25 bob, young turkey here, 25 bob, one up there, 30 shillings. Come over there, look.
Mike Leigh is a very famous British film director who makes films in a very specific way. He casts actors without necessarily knowing what the film's going to be about, and then he collaborates with those actors to create characters that are realistic and organic, and then he does sort of hours-long improvisations where the characters meet each other, or the actors meet each other in character, and you know, all sorts of situations come about, and eventually they distill it into a film. And he normally sets these films pretty much when they're made, so because he's been making films since the 70s, this means that someone like me, who was born in the late 90s, can look back and see a very kind of realistic, organic glimpse into the UK in the 80s, the UK in the 70s. But sometimes he makes films that are set longer ago. He's made a couple set in the 1800s, where the accents are not really period accurate, but they, I suppose, are more of a class indicator and an indicator of what someone's background might be. They're not trying to be scientifically pinpoint accurate. But one of his films, called Vera Drake, was set in London in the 1950s, actually in 1950, a time that's well within living memory even now, and which Leigh was alive during. And in that film, they seem to have gone to a bit of effort to actually make the speech period accurate. I first noticed this when I watched the film, and I noticed all of the characters saying yes instead of yeah. In modern British English, at least in my experience, yeah has become quite ubiquitous, at least in the southeast of England. And so to hear characters saying yes, it almost comes across as terse to someone of my generation. So when I noticed this, I got thinking, how accurate is the dialogue? How deep have they gone here? And seeing as the actuality recordings that Ian Rawes compiled and that the BBC recorded are all from this time period, from the same place, I think we can do a fun little comparison.
Is Joycey all right?
She's fine.
We ain't seen her in ages.
She started talking about moving.
Moving where?
To a bigger house.
Your house is big enough, isn't it?
Yes.
So in that short clip alone, we're already hearing some of those pronunciation features come through. We're hearing the high mid dress vowel in the word yes, and we're also hearing that strange kind of glottal replacement, glottal reinforcement thing that I talked about.
She started talking about moving. Talking.
But another thing that I noticed when I first watched this film is the use of intonation patterns that were common in Britain in the 1950s and have been going gradually out of favour since then. So consider the sentence, is Joycey alright? Is Joycey alright? So this is obviously a yes-no question. Yes, she is, or no, she isn't alright. And what you have here is what's called a high head. That's that first part of the intonational phrase that's relatively unimportant. And then you have the main stressed syllable of the intonational phrase, which is the first syllable of Joycey, dropping down to a very low pitch. Is Joy, and then a gradual rise towards the end of the intonational phrase. Is Joycey alright? Is Joycey alright? Now, in modern southeastern Anglo-English, it would be, I think, a lot more normal to say something like, is Joycey alright? Is Joycey alright? So here I hope you can hear the difference. Here the nuclear syllable is actually higher pitched than the rest, and then you have a full rise. Joycey alright? Joycey alright? So that's how I would probably pose a question like this. And by the way, I think that's in contrast again to the general American pattern where you'd be more likely to have a relatively low head and then start rising on the nucleus. Is Joycey alright? Is Joycey alright? So the actors, or at least Phil Davis in this clip, does this older question intonation. Now I think he's from a working class background, so it's possible he may just use this as his binary question intonation anyway. I'm not sure, I haven't been able to find a clip of him asking such a question in an interview. But to me it adds to the realism, because I think older British intonation can come across as kind of theatrical to modern British English speakers, and I think sometimes when you're watching an old film, it's difficult to separate why it's, you know, the aspects in which it seems theatrical because they're acting and there's a more theatrical acting style back then, and because the intonation is just different, and that's actually how people normally used intonation in casual situations. So I think Phil Davis plays this line very naturally indeed while using the older intonation pattern. And you can hear a similar intonation pattern in one of the clips that we played earlier from the actuality recordings. A sort of high falling head and then a low rising nucleus. Something like, can't you take a tenner off of each?
Can't you take a tenner off of each?
Chapel Street Market, 1941, March.
Well, now, we remember that bomb, don't we, Dad?
It blew all the windows out.
Yes, it did.
We was just round the corner, Penton Street.
Opposite the church.
In this scene you have a few other things. You have a few more examples of that glottal replacement reinforcement thing that we mentioned. And there's also some grammatical stuff. There's was being used for the first person plural, we was. And this is something that we, in our capacity as filmmakers, were recently able to use in something set around this time, because we happened to get an actor from sort of East London who still does this in his own dialect. And you can also hear that in some of the clips from the actuality recordings.
Just to see what we was doing.
We also get some intonational stuff. So in this line, Imelda Staunton's character says something like, well, now we remember that bomb, don't we, Dad?
Well, now, we remember that bomb, don't we, Dad?
So that first intonational phrase is, well, now we remember that bomb. I think I've reproduced that fairly well, but I'll play it just in case. And here, in this case, the main stressed syllable, the nucleus of this intonational phrase, is that, because they're already talking about bombs, and she remembers that one. But before the nucleus you have the head, and in this case the head has quite a complex tonal pattern. Well, now, we remember We remember. So here you have these two rhythmic stresses on we and mem, and those are both at a high pitch, and then the unstressed syllables in between those rhythmic stresses are at a low pitch. We remember that bomb, don't we? You know, so this is what I think would be called a complex or emphatic head, and I think that they're used a lot less in modern southeastern English, or you know, by younger generations like mine. And where they are used, they tend to have less pitch variance, I would say. So it's these kind of things like this complex head which contribute to our perception that old-fashioned speech is kind of more musical or more theatrical.
Well, when I was 13 years of age, I went out of a Sunday and I used to sell out all right. I used to sell pretty fair in those days.
Unfortunately, I couldn't find a date for this recording, but there's another recording that's dated 1945 which has the same interviewer speaking in more or less the same way, so I'd hazard a guess roughly 1945. And in this recording there's tantalising evidence of something that Victorian authors described a lot in working class speech. It was an often derided feature of working class speech that seems to have completely disappeared today, and that is getting V's and W's mixed up. And I've always wondered what the phonetic reality of this was. It seems likely that perhaps it was a real phonetic feature of Cockney speech, which more educated or upper class people didn't really understand, and so they just kind of simplified it as getting V's and W's mixed up. And the specific word I'm thinking of here is the unstressed form of was. So he says, bus.
Oh, when I was 13 years of age,
with what sounds like a bilabial fricative. So the w sound in standard English is made by rounding the lips and bringing the tongue back up to the soft palate, the velum, w, w. Whereas a bilabial fricative is just made by kind of making a v sound, except instead of using one lip and one row of teeth, you're just using both lips. V, v. I'm not very good at doing it, so I might be doing it slightly wrong. So I think the man fairly unambiguously does this on that one word. But there are also examples of him using w quite unambiguously. So perhaps this is an example of a speaker who does this in specific circumstances. Maybe that was true for all Cockney speakers that the upper classes were making fun of. Maybe it was just something that happened in very specific phonological situations or phonetic environments. There's another instance of him possibly doing it, where he says, I think, I went.
Yeah, I went out, went.
And it almost sounds like he's saying, I went. But on further reflection, I wonder if it's possible that he's actually saying, I've went. So using the auxiliary verb have, sort of collapsed into a contraction there, I've, and then using a non-standard conjugational form, saying I've went instead of I've gone. I know that working class Londoners have a tendency to use the present continuous, I have done something, in situations where standard English would probably prescribe the past simple. So I've gone to the shop rather than I went to the shop. I've met him yesterday rather than I met him yesterday. So it's possible he's just doing this and it's actually not an example of the VW thing. So we only have one solid data point here, not really enough to draw from, but I thought it was interesting to point out a possible recorded example of that. I think a lot of the wonder in these recordings comes from just experiencing them, and although I know that I'll be using them in my creative work and probably revisiting them on this channel, I just thought that I'd present a few little snippets. I'm sorry the video's been slightly unstructured this time, but thank you very much to Ian Rawes for compiling these so that it's possible to see them and listen to them. Thank you very much to everybody who continues to support my Patreon. Thank you to everyone who subscribes to the channel. And yeah, I'm hoping the video schedule will become a bit more regular. I've just been struggling a bit recently because we've been working on this web series, which will be hopefully uploaded soon. I think that's everything, so I'll just leave you with this. Oh, and that music video by the Paperweights, I would highly recommend going to watch it. Yeah, so I think I'll just leave you with some ambient street dialogue that is almost certainly genuinely natural, and that the people probably didn't know was being recorded.
You give us this step up. Yeah, so would that be all right? That'd be all right. Would you give us 2 seconds? You're not going to be there. We just come just behind. We've only got behind. We go behind.
So when you're ready, BBC. I'm not the town star. I am the sword bearer and acting common crier. I was a common crier for Libya. Every paper's wrong. We still want to think that. Just as you read the bottom half, do it. Yes. I'm ready. Are you ready?